What if I told you that a single handshake in New Delhi shook the very foundations of global power? Not in Washington, not in Paris, but in a room flooded with camera flashes, where a young African leader dared to gamble against the weight of history. On that day, Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso did not step into a ceremony. He stepped onto a battlefield disguised in suits and silk ties. The number was $15 billion. The press called it a deal. But those who understood knew it was more like a stick of dynamite wired beneath the global order. Oil exchanged for technology, energy exchanged for modernization, sovereignty exchanged for respect. In that instant, a poor, landlocked nation, long dismissed as irrelevant, challenged centuries of dependency. Burkina Faso is no stranger to hardship. Generations have tilled dry soil, dug gold under foreign flags, endured poverty and terrorism, while distant powers wrote the rules. But on that day, under blinding lights, Traoré signed not as a beggar, not as a client, but as an equal. And somewhere between the clicking cameras and the scratching pens, the West felt the ground tremble beneath its feet. This was not aid. This was not the poison chalice called IMF loans. This was a partnership with India, a pact that promised oil rigs, steel mills, power plants, and defense workshops. An agreement that dares to ask, can Africa rise on its own terms? Or is this merely another illusion painted in fresher colors? My friends, this gamble is far more dangerous than you think. If the pact succeeds, Burkina Faso could become the spark that ignites a continental awakening. If it fails, it could become the cautionary tale whispered in every capital from Dakar to Washington. So I ask you, if oil, steel, and technology flow into Burkina Faso, who truly wins? The people, the partner, or the hidden powers in the shadows? And more importantly, is Ibrahim Traoré's bold move the beginning of Africa's liberation or the opening act of its next great trap? Stay with me, because the answer will change the way you see not only Burkina Faso, but the future of the world itself. $15 billion gamble. Who really wins in the Traoré-Modi Pact? When the cameras stopped flashing and the ink had barely dried, the details of the Burkina Faso-India agreement began to surface. It was not just a deal, it was an entire economic blueprint worth $15 billion, carved into the future of one of Africa's most underestimated nations. But let us peel back the layers and ask, what exactly is inside this monumental pact? At the heart of the agreement lies oil, long hidden beneath Burkina Faso's soil, often ignored by the very powers who sought to control its gold. For $4 billion, India will fund extraction and refining, ensuring Burkina Faso is no longer merely a crude exporter, but climbs the ladder of value-added production. Imagine refineries in Ouagadougou, not Paris, producing fuel not only for tankers bound east, but also for the nation's own struggling industries. This is more than barrels of oil. It is a statement of sovereignty. Then comes $5 billion for petrochemicals and energy infrastructure, pipelines, storage facilities, and processing plants. For decades, Burkina Faso was forced to import refined products at inflated prices while its people lived in darkness. Now the promise is different. Power grids humming across cities and villages, energy flowing into factories that have yet to be built. Yet here lies the question, will those grids truly light the homes of ordinary Burkinabe, or will they serve only industrial enclaves tied to foreign investors? $3 billion are earmarked for steel and manufacturing plants. For a landlocked country with scarce infrastructure, this is nothing short of revolutionary. Rail tracks, machines, and construction materials could one day be made not in Shanghai or Brussels, but in Bobo Dioulasso and Koudougou. Thousands of jobs could sprout in an economy where unemployment has strangled youth for generations. But again, will these factories belong to the people of Burkina Faso, or will they be fenced-off fortresses where locals remain cheap labor while profits vanish overseas? The pact also reserves $2 billion for defense technology. To many in the West, this was the most provocative line item. For too long, Burkina Faso depended on French arms, American aid, or Russian consultants. But Traoré wants rifles stamped not with foreign logos, but with Burkinabe steel, communication systems, armored vehicles, even drone capacity, assembled on African soil with Indian expertise. Yet this too sparks unease. Will India's weapons empower Burkina Faso's fight against insurgency, or will they drag the nation into New Delhi's own rivalries with China and Pakistan? The final billion spreads across agriculture, telecommunications, and training programs. It is perhaps the most overlooked yet most decisive part of the deal, because a refinery can pump oil, a steel plant can forge rails, but without educated minds and fertile fields, sovereignty is a hollow shell. Scholarships, research centers, and modern farming equipment could change everyday lives in Kaya, Wahiguya, and beyond. But history warns us, how many times have such promises been signed on paper only to vanish into corruption, bureaucracy, or offshore accounts? $15 billion is no small figure. It represents a new road, a road either to empowerment or exploitation. To India, this pact secures vital energy for its booming economy, diversifies its partnerships away from the Middle East, and plants its flag firmly in West Africa. To Burkina Faso, it is the chance to rewrite destiny, to move from a supplier of raw materials to a nation of builders, manufacturers, and innovators. But the deeper question remains, who holds the pen writing this future? Is it truly Ibrahim Traoré and his people, or invisible forces behind the scenes shaping outcomes for their own gain? As the world watches, skeptics whisper that this is too good to be true. Optimists dream that it is the first step toward Africa's real independence. The truth, my friends, is that both paths remain open. What matters is not the ink on the contract, but the discipline in the years ahead. So I leave you with this. If Burkina Faso's oil flows east and India's factories rise in the Sahel, will this be remembered as a partnership of equals, or as another illusion carefully crafted to keep Africa hoping but never rising? Stay with me, because what happened next shook not just Ouagadougou, but the halls of Washington, Paris, and Beijing. And before we step into the next chapter, let me ask you this. Who will write the rest of this story? Them or us? If you believe the truth about Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, and Africa must be heard, then hit subscribe right now. Every subscription not only ensures you won't miss what comes next, but also helps spread these hidden stories to those who need to hear them. Shockwaves from Ouagadougou. Why the world fears Traoré's move. The announcement spread like wildfire across newsrooms in Washington, Paris, Brussels, and Beijing. Editors scrambled to adjust headlines. In Ouagadougou, celebrations erupted as if a second independence had been declared, and in quiet corridors of power, the whispers grew louder. What is Traoré doing? How dare Burkina Faso sign a pact of this magnitude? For the people of Burkina Faso, the moment felt electric. In markets, vendors spoke of jobs that might finally reach their children. In cafes, students debated whether steel plants and power grids would truly rise, or if this was just another promise destined to fade. On the streets, some saw Traoré as a liberator who had struck a blow against the chains of neo-colonialism. Others, more cautious, feared he was gambling the nation's future on untested promises. But the reaction abroad was far less celebratory. In Paris, the government struggled to mask its frustration. France had long viewed West Africa as its backyard, bound to it through the CFA franc and military agreements. Now, one of its former colonies was openly bypassing French influence, replacing French oil companies with Indian capital. French analysts warned that the deal might set a precedent for other Sahel nations, eroding what little remained of Paris's credibility on the continent. In Washington, the tone was more analytical but no less concerned. Officials worried that the deal would tilt the Sahel's balance of power away from Western influence. India was not seen as an enemy, but the symbolism was dangerous. If Burkina Faso could secure billions without bowing to the IMF or World Bank, what would stop Mali, Niger, or even Ghana from following suit? And if such moves weakened Western leverage, would that create more space for Russia or China to slip in? China, for its part, observed with measured silence. Beijing had poured billions into Africa under the Belt and Road Initiative, but the arrival of India on the same stage threatened to complicate its dominance. Behind closed doors, strategists worried that an India-Africa partnership could undercut Chinese contracts, especially if it came with fewer strings attached. Still, some Chinese voices dismissed the move as too risky to last, whispering that Burkina Faso was simply playing with fire. And then came the reaction on social media, where narratives clash faster than bullets. Across Africa, youth posted messages of pride. If Burkina Faso can do this, so can we. Hashtags praising Traoré trended in Bamako, Niamey, and even Lagos. To them, this was not just a deal, it was proof that African nations could negotiate without kneeling. But Western commentators painted a darker picture, naive leaders selling sovereignty, India exploiting Africa in new clothes, a deal destined to collapse. The climax of this story lies in the raw tension it produced. For Traoré, the pact was a declaration that Burkina Faso would no longer be dictated to. For the West, it was a threat that their traditional grip on Africa might be slipping. And for ordinary Burkinabe, it was a fragile hope, an awakening balanced on the knife's edge of possibility. The world was divided. Was this the birth of a new era, or the first step toward a dangerous unraveling? Could a nation so small, so often overlooked, truly shift the global chessboard? Or would the backlash from old powers crush it before it had a chance to grow? The answers, my friends, are still unwritten. And the storm that followed would test not only Burkina Faso's resolve, but the patience of every power watching from afar. $15 billion and the battle inside Burkina Faso. Every international agreement, no matter how glamorous, must ultimately be measured by its impact on ordinary lives. With the $15 billion pact signed with India, the biggest question echoing across Burkina Faso is, will this time be different? First comes electricity and infrastructure. Millions of Burkinabe still live in darkness, where power cuts are a daily fact of life. If the promised energy projects materialize, thousands of villages could see light for the very first time. Imagine a child studying under steady electric light instead of a flickering candle, or a hospital running ventilators through the night instead of shutting down for lack of power. For the people, electricity is not just technology, it is dignity. Next is employment. Steel mills, refineries, and industrial zones could generate tens of thousands of jobs. In a country where young people often face only two choices, remain unemployed at home or risk their lives crossing to Europe, This pact offers a third path: to stay, to build, and to dream. A stable job could be a ticket out of poverty, a beacon of hope for entire families. The agreement also carries opportunities for education and training. Scholarships, research centers, and technological cooperation programs could help retain talent instead of losing it abroad. An engineer trained in Ouagadougou rather than Paris is not just a skilled worker, it is a symbol of intellectual independence. Yet the dark side looms large. African history is filled with billion-dollar projects that ended in disappointment. Corruption could swallow the profits, leaving behind abandoned sites and broken promises. The people of Burkina Faso have grown accustomed to seeing grand deals enrich a tiny elite while leaving the majority in poverty. If this scenario repeats, the pact will become nothing more than a bitter joke. Another danger is new dependency. If the factories bear India's label but fail to transfer real technology, Burkina Faso may simply be switching masters from Paris to New Delhi. The chains remain, only painted in new colors. There is also the risk of domestic political pressure. If promises fail to translate into reality, if unemployment persists, the people may soon turn against Traoré. Burkina Faso is a land of uprisings, where hope and anger often trade places overnight. Traoré must know he did not just sign a contract, he wagered his own legitimacy. Finally, there is the threat of insecurity. Terrorist groups, rooted in poverty and instability, will see new factories and pipelines as prime targets. A single successful attack could spread fear, paralyze progress, and shatter confidence. Thus, the $15 billion pact is both a golden opportunity and a perilous gamble. It could open a new chapter for Africa, or repeat the same cycle of broken dreams. So I ask you, will the light from these new factories and grids truly reach every home in Burkina Faso, or will it remain the spotlight of a political theater? If you want to keep uncovering the truth behind the curtain, then hit subscribe now. Every subscription not only ensures you won't miss the next part, but also helps bring this story to more people who need to hear it. When Washington, Paris, and Beijing look toward Ouagadougou, no international pact exists in a vacuum. The $15 billion deal between Burkina Faso and India is not just a bilateral agreement, it is a message to the world. And the reactions from global power centers prove exactly that. In Washington, strategists sat before maps of the Sahel with visible concern. The United States has long maintained a presence in the region under the banner of counterterrorism, but the real interest lies in resources and geopolitics. Now, a small country like Burkina Faso dared to sign a colossal deal without IMF or World Bank approval, two levers Washington often used to shape African economies. The question echoing inside U.S. circles was, if Burkina Faso can do this, what's stopping Niger, Mali, or even Ghana from following? In Paris, the reaction was not just political, but emotional. Since colonial times, France viewed West Africa as its backyard, but after being pushed out of Mali, losing influence in Niger, now Burkina Faso too has chosen a different path. French politicians called it betrayal, while Parisian newspapers admitted, our influence in Africa is collapsing like a sandcastle. In Beijing, the response was more cautious. China has been Africa's largest player for years, funneling billions into loans and projects through the Belt and Road Initiative. But India's sudden entrance onto the same stage poses a new challenge. If New Delhi proves it can provide capital without the burden of debt traps, many African nations could pivot away from Beijing. For China, this pact is a warning. Competition on the continent is about to intensify. But reactions did not come from superpowers alone. The European Union feared energy and mineral flows from the Sahel could slip away from Europe's orbit. Russia, meanwhile, watched silently, ready to exploit any gap to expand its military and political footprint. As the world looks toward Ouagadougou, this agreement is no longer just about oil, steel, or factories. It is a declaration that the balance of global power is shifting. So the question becomes, can Burkina Faso hold its ground in this geopolitical storm, or will it be swept away as superpowers clash for dominance? Burkina Faso at the crossroads of destiny. The future has never been more fragile. The $15 billion pact with India is a doorway, but the real question is, once Burkina Faso steps through, where will the road lead? A bright scenario could unfold, steel factories roaring with life, oil rigs lighting up the night sky, young people finding steady work, and engineers